Alright, I'm getting ready to start checking the shock clearance on the ball joint mod again, and fighting the shock, because it is a brand new shock. So the pressure in there, trying to push it up and down, is a royal pain in the rear. So what I'm doing, this piece, anybody who ever followed the strut modification thread recognizes that. I use that to slide inside the tube to weld, and that way I don't punch through and leave any boogers on the inside of the strut tube. So anyway, I thought I'd put it into commission here. It's a hair bigger, but that'll just provide me a little extra clearance. So a couple other mods that I did to my shock positioner, if you will, I guess. I put a sleeve inside here to take up some of the slop. That way it's a little more accurate. Basically I'm just using that to hold the hole lined up so that the length is the same. So here, okay, kind of somewhat self-explanatory. I'm setting the nuts so that it's just shy of the end stops. Okay, so now here's when it's fully extended, and I'm not as worried about getting closer to this, okay, because there's going to be hard urethane bump stops in there, and it's only going to be having the weight of the wheel and the suspension, okay. So I don't need as much squish zone there. So I'm setting that one right up there. Now this one, on the other hand, I've got it set right about here, and I think that's the line I put on there where the bump stop hits anyway. Okay, so that's giving me close to 1/2 inch of squish, because that's going to be a rubber bump stop down there. And actually, this is where it hits with it being cut. Okay, because if you remember, I cut the tip off the end of that bump stop so that it would show with it squished. So I just want to make sure that there's no way that this shock bottoms out. I don't want to go killing the shocks on the car. So that is the reasoning behind where I got this set up. So these are all locked down. I just got to lock those two down. And then I can put this back in. And this was the area where it was hitting the upper control arm. So this should give me a way to do that without having to fight the shock all the time. Okay, so I got the shock tester, whatever the heck you want to call it. Anyway, the mock shock set up here. One thing I noticed immediately was when I stuck it in is that the arm's too far down. Okay, so I think you can see that I'm better part of an inch, 3/4 of an inch or so away, and if I try to hold it right in line with that, I'm touching here again. Now, my buddy Dave and I were talking about this yesterday. He stopped by for a couple minutes. If I redo the shock mount, okay, I could relocate this back. That would make for a slightly stiffer ride with the shock. The more angle the shock has, the softer the ride is. The more straight up and down the shock, the more harsh the ride. It's a truck. I'm not really going to worry about it too much, I don't think. Anyway, what that would do, though, is if I could move it back a bit, that would help gain some clearance up here without having to drastically modify the arm any more than it already has been. So now that I'm looking at this, I'm down hard on the bump stop. But that's not the stock bump stop. Part of the reason for not using the stock one is because they were those little rubber cones, and they would go right up in this stamped arm here. And I don't think the 620 ones lined up. I'd have to go check. I think the 620 ones are actually mounted back here. And I don't want to have to work on the arms, so the owner of the truck basically can bend that flange back to get the clearance, but they may not be able to weld a plate across here to change that height. And I'm not sure that the stock rubber ones wouldn't squish down so far that they wouldn't bottom out the shock. So let's raise it up just a bit and check the upper limit now. Okay, so now we're hanging on the shock. That's not what we want. Got plenty of clearance in here though at that angle, but so if we take it all the way up to the top, Well, I'm not sure you can see that. Let's, yeah, you see how much all thread we still have? I'm up against the bump stop, and I have those nuts and washers set to, you know, to show me where that hits. So that's way too much squish. I'm losing a lot of my travel here, because realistically it'd be right about there by the time it actually sat on the bump stop. So I'm losing 2 inches of travel there. So what I'm thinking is, if I redo the shock mount, I can move the hole back a little bit, help gain the clearance, but then I can also raise the hole up, okay? And by doing that, that would allow the arm to go down further. But I gotta kind of I gotta make sure I take into consideration here exactly where ride height is, because right there in the middle is what I'm shooting for. Okay, right now the middle is about here. The middle of the shock travel is actually closer to here. So I'm gonna have to play with that a little bit and think about that, figure it out, find out, decide whether or not it would behoove me to make a new shock mount. I went ahead and mounted the hub back up because I kept referring to ride height based on the shock position. Okay, the reality is ride height is based on the wheel position. So I put this back at ride height. I put the hub back at ride height, and so you can see here that here's the center of the shock travel. We're at least 1 inch off, and that is basically what's going on with, you know, like when we lowered it down and we didn't hit the bump stop. I said I was missing about 3/4 of an inch to 1 inch of travel down there. So if I were to put a new shock mount on there and raise the hole up about 1 inch at ride height with the hub, that would put us in the middle of shock travel. That would also make it to where when we go all the way down, we hit the bump stops. And when I came up, I don't remember exactly offhand, but we still had plenty of room for another inch at the top of the shock travel, you know, when the suspension bottoms out. So I think I will be looking into doing that. For temporary right now, what I might do is just, I might just simply come in here and like tack weld some washers on there to, you know, get the hole position where I want it. And then I can start working on the bracket design and stuff. All right. Basically, I've got a just you know, something mocked up there, a couple of brackets to show about where I'm looking to put the shock mount. It's not holding it quite centered. That's something else to consider too, is relocating it left or right, because the arm is more forward. The shock actually sits at a little bit of an angle. We've talked about that previously and stuff like that. So anyway, we are all the way at the upper limit of the shock travel, or not the shock travel, but the suspension. The bump stop is, we're up against the bump stop pretty firm, which is at least a 1/2 inch into its squish. And if you remember, I set this so that there was still about a 1/2 inch of squish on the shock. So we should be plenty away from bottoming out the shock. And you can see that's loose in there, so it's not actually, that's how I set the bracket, so that it would have a little bit of play. So let me just set this down real quick and change the, okay, so if I put this down and bring it down to, just going to put these in backwards to just hold it for reference right now. Okay, so this is ride height again. Okay, and let's see if you can see that. See that mark there? That's so we're within 3/8 of an inch of center. So that's not bad there. That's probably close enough. And then let's take it all the way down. Okay, so now we're hard against this bump stop, and as you can see, we still have plenty of room before the shock pulls down. Now, I didn't leave near as much leeway on here on the shock, so when that's up, you know, there'll only be about another 1/8 of an inch or so before the shock bottoms out. So I think we're fine. I don't really want to raise this much more to try to get the travel in the center, because then that would shorten up the distance I have here before it bottoms out, and which still puts me into the squish and everything like that on the bump stop. But if you account for the squish, you know, there's at least that much there on the bottom that I accounted for on the shock, about that much difference. So that really kind of puts us pretty much in the middle of travel. So I think it's pretty close. About time for me to shut down for the day, because I got to go see if I can get these converted and uploaded, and then go to work tonight. Last little blip I forgot there, with the shock position, move toward the inside just a little bit. If I hold this basically in the center of that hole, I'm just this way of center. If I hold it in center, there is just a tiny bit of clearance there. This body is a hair bigger than the shock, so there will be a hair more clearance. Yeah, I don't know, will it focus close enough? You know, that's about center. It goes forward about another 1/16 of an inch. So anyway, so it looks like moving that back will save from having to do any more drastic modification to the control arm. So that's another benefit. Realistically, I should probably get a longer piece of pipe that comes all the way down. That way I can check the clearances in some other areas, like that lower bump stop piece right here. So it should still clear. Let's see here. What are we sitting at? We're over an inch, and the radius of the body is less than an inch, so it'll clear. So I think we're good to go for now. All right, quick little addition here. The shock mount. You know, I'm talking about relocating that so that the hole is up, you know, back and behind here. Okay, now if you can see this in the video without me getting everybody seasick, it sits down inside a dimple here, okay, and the hole there is for water drain collecting in there, you know. So they stamp this piece out, and then they fully weld it down each side. So what I'm looking to do is just cut that off flush, and I think what I'll probably do is create a 1/4 inch plate that will come all the way out to the high spot here. I'll have to play around with that and find out exactly where it sits, but then that way I could set that 1/4 inch plate right down over that pocket and not have to deal with the pocket. And then what I can do then is I can offset the shock back a 1/4 inch, 3/8 of an inch to get the shock going straight up and down in the suspension there. And then I'll use 1/4 inch side tabs and stuff like that. Might even put interlocking features on it, so that way I could just put them down onto the 1/4 inch plate and locate them. And the other thing too is, what I'm thinking then is, since this section's missing, you know, that's what I cut out of there. If I make that plate long enough to come down into here, okay, and so minus that inch there, so the plate would be, you know, roughly 3-4 inches long. It would overlap, and then when I fully weld it down around here, that actually creates another gusset that would help connect the two pieces of the arm back together when I've cut it. So another bonus reason for creating a new shock mount. And I might possibly, this arm is the opposite side and it's backwards. If I offset it, I'm on that plate. I could actually bring that plate down far enough forward and possibly use that as a nice mount mounting place for the sway bar mount. So it'll be a more expensive piece being that size, but just might be worthwhile.